Hello and welcome to another episode of the ADHD Goals podcast. I have a fantastic guest for you today. Her name is Sarah Enner and her company is the Growth Council, and they make ADHD human and profitable, which helps companies and humans use ADHD as a competitive advantage. She's also a speaker and offers one-to-one peer support. She's also an international athlete and a lawyer on the side. That sounds like a list of an ADHD person.
Yes, it's a bit of a mouthful and definitely indicative of my also inability to let go of some of those identities that I have in the background. But yeah, definitely. Thanks for inviting me, though. It's lovely to meet other folks that are doing work in this space and learn something together. So
Absolutely. So how are you today anyway?
I'm fine. Mornings are always discombobulated for me. So I had a grand plan of how I was going to prep for this and then discovered that I'm at my cottage. So nothing is in place and everything needs to be set up. I have turned off the breaker for my refrigerator because it's loud. So yeah, all of the things are hectic in the mornings for Sarah.
Well, I mean, for those who are listening only, I can just see you are in a cottage there. And we should mention that you are in Canada. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm imagining now, not that I can see outside, I can't, but I've got a vision of Canada that is very green and
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, sort of, except it's fall right now. So it's very orange and yellow as well. But yeah, it was a really rainy summer. So it was the greenest I've seen it in a long time. Absolutely beautiful. We're up here in Northern Ontario. So Algonquin Park, if anybody's heard of that. So yeah, like all kinds of outdoor activities and wildlife and just beauty to soak in, which is why I come up here and hide out sometimes.
Yeah. No, Coconut for the regular listeners is my dog. And we have a good time when we actually get out because I live in London. So mostly our day-to-day walks are just, round the concrete jungle. But when I get the opportunity to go out into the green woods and everything, I do feel a lot better. And he gets a nice big old run out. So I think it's good for us all, isn't it?
It definitely is. They say it is one of the best things for your mental health aside from human connection. So
Yeah.
there you go. I should mention for the listeners as well that I do have a minor connection. Well, not minor. I have a connection to the UK as well because my dad is from there. And so I am a citizen and have family on the South Coast in Bournemouth and Ringwood. And yeah, so
Oh,
a
fantastic.
little bit of a connection for you. Yeah.
Well, there we are. Well, as you have mentioned your roots, we do like to start the show with finding out a little bit more about our guests. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your life and your journey with ADHD?
Sure. Well, I'm somewhat new to my journey with ADHD because I had no idea that I had it until about a year and a half ago. So it's very interesting to look back now and see all of the things that should have been glaringly obvious. I asked my mother, I think, when I was diagnosed, "Are you surprised with this?" And she said, "Not at all. You couldn't pay attention to anything when you were a child." What? Didn't want to look into this or ask, but I guess women tend not to be disruptive, right? We're socialized to behave ourselves and speak when spoken to and all of those things and, seek out good grades and be the good girl oftentimes. So I was getting good grades. I was not disrupting classes. They say sometimes that women have more of the hyperactivity in their minds. I have definitely both. I'm one of the lucky ones that gets to be outwardly hyperactive as well. But yeah, so I found out I was at a friend's shower and someone at the party, as I was describing how my business was evolving and how I was just absolutely going to make it stick with the legal stuff right now. And here's what I was going to build to take away some of the day-to-day boring stuff from myself. Maybe I was going to hire articling students, which are like trainee solicitors, and then got overwhelmed with the idea of having to supervise and still having to know all the details. And then, should maybe I get foreign trained lawyers who are fully trained and able to do most of the lawyering and just need minor supervision. And then I got overwhelmed with the amount of admin that they would expect and, salaries and what would that look like. And this woman just sort of stopped me and said, "Do you have ADHD?" Just like a lot of starting and a lot of ideas and not a lot of finishing. And I was already on this journey of figuring out what I am great at, sort of what are my strengths, and had realized that even with the lawyering, this was sort of going on in the background just before this, you know, what in lawyering was speaking to those specific things, which it turns out if I look at my Clifton strengths are all the influencing ones, right? Like I like to win others over, command a room, activate others, don't necessarily want to finish the things or, get into the detail, hard to activate myself. But there wasn't a lot of execution, which when I actually did an audit, someone told me to do a 2-week audit of everything I do. And I thought,
Mhm.
I don't have time for that. So I did one project that I worked on and realized that when I'm reviewing a contract, out of say 10 hours of the whole shebang from start to finish, from getting myself to look at it, sharing the information with the client, only about 20% of that time was the stuff that I love, right? On the phone with the client, making the stuff digestible. And 80% of it was slogging through the document, which I'm great at. And I can see all of the connections in the big picture, but not as interesting to me because I am an extrovert and I like to be around folks and
Mm.
interacting and making a difference in their lives, which was less possible than one expects when you become a lawyer, I think.
I hear what you're saying and resonate with a lot of that myself as well. I was constantly having ideas about things that I would start, projects I would start, and realizing that perhaps all of these things that I wanted to start, if you saw them, if you over time, you think they all connect to the same thing. True. And
Yeah.
it's like a purpose and a journey. But yeah, a lot of my work that I was doing before this, I was having ideas and seeing the big picture. And because we were a small company, they're saying, okay, can you now implement that big picture? And I was like, whoa, that's a
Yeah.
lot of detail and stuff that, aren't my skill set. But I will hyper focus and learn everything about that skill set, but then realize that I'm
Mhm.
sad because I'm not being creative. And
That's part of so I was trying a bunch of different offers and launching different legal ideas to try to bring myself in alignment with that, activating and interacting with others. So one example was I was going to do a subscription legal service, but it was purely that people could basically have me on retainer to call me as often as they wanted and get a bit of a check on, is this an issue? What do I need to worry about? Anything they could talk about in 20 or 30 minutes, we would discuss. And I very quickly lost interest in even launching it because I realized every time I told somebody, "Oh, it's great." And then, "Oh, but now that you've identified all these wonderful things, can you draft the agreement?" And I was like, I don't want to draft the agreement, right? I can draft the agreement, but now that I'm just saying it out loud, it's also not very profitable when you think about it. And I look at what amount of time, if I'm charging hourly, I would write off because it took me way longer than it should because I couldn't force myself. And yeah, you can't bill people for that time, right? Or you'd do a flat fee and it would just, you'd hyper focus to get the detail right and realize you're the lawyer and feeling like your whole job is to be right about the law. And I found that probably played into the overwhelm a bit, right? Of getting started. Oh gosh, I've got to do this and I've got to do it right and I've got to do it in detail. Whereas others people can just sort of say, oh, let's eyeball this and give a sense. As much as that was what the plan was, I'm not great at that.
so what specific law was it that you were working?
So when I was working in big banks, I was a securities lawyer and investment funds and asset management one. So I launched some of the exchange traded funds, the first biggest suite in Canada, which I loved. But the elements of that I loved were actually working with the business, building something, building a product. And sure, it had all these elements. It had, what are they trying to achieve? Okay, I get to learn now about what a covered call is or how the market works or what the law is that applies. And then I also got to figure out how it could fit into this very interesting and complex legal and regulatory landscape. And as long as I was still being included in the social events and I was being brought to the meetings to present to the boards and all of that, it was wonderful. And then a whole lot of change happened, right? I had 5 bosses over the course of the last 2 years that I was at the bank, varying personalities. As we know, ADHD is a pretty big one. So some people not so keen what they perceived as a lack of soft skills. But when I went out on my own, which was really just supposed to be a stopgap, everyone said, well, while you're thinking about what you want to do when you grow up, why don't you just practice law because you've got this license? And so that became every time someone came in the door, it was a smaller business and I had to learn from scratch what they needed because I was doing the sophisticated work. I had to adjust to a less sophisticated mindset in terms of, valuing legal advice and wanting to pay for it, seeing the value of that. So yeah, it was kind of, entrepreneurs and small businesses that were just taking their first steps and saying, okay, maybe it's time I had a privacy policy. Maybe it's time that I actually have contracts with my vendors rather than handshakes. And so that was what I did from there, which was certainly overwhelming. Again, I'm going to just say overwhelming over and over again. If you ever ask me how
Mm,
I'm feeling about something, overwhelmed.
yeah.
That seems to be the theme these days.
So with all that, you mentioned, there was a lot of with the new clients that you were getting, there was a lot of learning from scratch and meeting them where they were. Did you relish that opportunity? Is one of your ADHD traits like a love of learning, or did you also find that over time that did lead to overwhelm, that you were always having to sort of learn everything about them from scratch?
So I think I definitely have a love of learning. I think the challenge that I faced with the learning in this circumstance was in my mind's eye, and this maybe comes to the importance and interest dichotomy of the ADHD brain, but it was like I felt it wasn't complex enough. It wasn't interesting enough to me because, oh, you need to incorporate a business. Okay, well, I can figure that out. It's going to take me more time than it should. And it's not really all that hard. And, you know, I'm not interested to learn that. Where what I did love learning was when someone came with a problem. This person has canceled my business's lease and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. Or I relished a lot of the business related things like, I need to get a loan because I need to figure out where I can get some cash flow for my business. Okay, let me help you with the financial institutions here and find out what you need to acquire and what you have to prove. And, so sometimes it was that getting out of the legal was very interesting to me as well, which always had been, right? When I was a business partner in securities law as well. So, yeah, but I also think I value feeling very much like I'm trusted and that my opinion is valued.
Hmm.
And that was an interesting thing to navigate with startups who kind of knew that they wanted to value this, but also had to move their business forward on a very shoestring budget. So, that was very different from, as I said, a bank that knows that it has a reputation on the line and it needs to make sure it's done the right thing. It may not always agree with me, and I don't need anybody to agree with my advice. I just need them to hear it, to want to hear it, to allow me to give the level that makes me comfortable of advice, the detail that I think is important for folks. And yeah, so I love learning, but it has to be a bit urgent and a bit complex, I think, for it to be interesting enough for me to dive right in and get focused.
Mm. It's interesting because I think because my previous job was a UX designer, so designing websites and digital strategies, and we worked specifically in the hotel industry, and quite often a hotel would come with needing a new website. They'd want to do a lot of marketing, but they'd start off with a website, and really, just creating a hotel website from the beginning it's quite straightforward. And I wanted to get to the testing bit where we'd launch some pages and then we'd say, right, we need to do A/B testing and figure out what the problems are and like almost take it like scientifically. And you don't know what's going to happen or what is going to be the solution to the problem. That was far more exciting for me, but quite often it wouldn't necessarily get there quick enough or their appetite for doing it or, they want to focus on something else. But yeah, it's certainly, you've got to have some feeling of validation about what it is that you're bringing to the working relationship. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've learned about myself, and I said to my dad over the Thanksgiving weekend that I wish I had realized this when my grandfather was still alive, but he used to call me creative all the time and artistic. And I thought, what are you talking about? I had good grades in English and math. And, yes, I can write a good essay, but creative, that doesn't seem right. And I'm observing that I actually am creative, but also want to be. So when you describe a website, for example, this is a great example of how when I started my business, I procrastinated by finding the interesting thing and diving in. So I have half of a computer science degree as well, which I started after 2 years, left that and went to history just to finish off my degree. But I built my own website. And to this day, it's still what I have created, and I'm the only one that's managed it. Not great. I'm not an expert in computer science. I only got halfway through. I didn't focus on websites. But I found myself for 40 days or something like that, writing all the copy for it and, placing everything just so. And I find the same thing now with my speaking business. I oftentimes, again, procrastinate on the writing of the speech in favor of how can I do something creative for a promo for the speech? Or what will my slides be for the speech if I need to have slides or I choose to have slides? So yeah, I find it really interesting how much I want that creative outside of myself. I want to embrace it. Maybe after years of pretending I wasn't all that creative or not embracing it. But yeah, I know what you mean about, we focus where we're interested and we get frustrated when we're in the spots that we don't want to
Yeah.
be focused on.
I mean, I'm repeating every time you say something, I go, "Oh, yeah, I get that too." And I think, when you start something new, like you mentioned, if you're doing a speech or whatever, you procrastinate on writing the speech. But this is also important, so I ought to do that. But in the face of it, it's probably maybe I should get the speech done first and then do those. But have you ever really sort of examined what is at the root of that procrastination?
I think it's just the interest-based nervous system, right? I'm a little more stressed and overwhelmed about the writing, the important part, because it
Yeah,
matters, right?
yeah,
Where the visual or, those kinds of creative pieces are not as overwhelming, I think, just because they're fun and they're interesting. And yes, you kind of have to do them anyway. So I gave a speech at a tech conference here called Elevate Festival a couple weeks ago. And I mean, I love being pretty impromptu, but this was one of those times where it's a big stage. There's a lot of people. It's going to be filmed, with a spotlight on me and all those things. And so almost that importance of it to me made it really tough to start writing. I usually like to write at the last possible second. Someone asked me to meet the week before a talk. I don't know what I'm saying yet. And I had a deadline to hand in slides a week before the talk. So I just made up 4 generic slides and said, I think I can make something that fits here. I had no notes. And to your point about what's important, I had no notes and I was a bit stressed on stage for my first time in this big crowd with a spotlight. And I blanked in the middle of the speech, right? Which I thought was perfect. I was talking about ADHD and we lose our train of thought
yeah,
constantly. I don't think I've ever been on a podcast or in a room and not been like, oh, what was I saying? Or what did you just say? But yeah, like that, there's pros and cons to it. In any other circumstance where it would be more casual and interactive, I'm very happy to postpone, but it's kind of like doing a TED talk. You have to memorize it. Shouldn't I be planning that months in advance and practicing it? But it's not
yeah.
where my mind goes.
Yeah, when I ask myself, why are you procrastinating on this? For me personally, it tends to be, I guess, a fear of failure. What the bit that I'm sort of procrastinating on is probably the most exposing bit of me to, if it's an public thing. I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be the bit where I get found out, or this will be the thing that means it doesn't go as well, and so you just put it off. Mm. But I'm working on that. But yeah, I can catch myself and notice it, and it's just a trick of trying to work my way through it and getting it done.
Yeah. I have an outsized amount of confidence. I assume everything's going to be fine all the time. I'm not really worried. Not that I don't still get nervous or any of that stuff, but as you were talking, I thought to myself, maybe part of the procrastination for me is, and I didn't realize this was a challenge until I realized it's a symptom of ADHD. And again, these things kind of come up and I notice them over time. And oh, maybe I do sort of exhibit that trait somehow, is the idea that sort of organizing vast amounts of information is a bit tough at times, and that may feel a little overwhelming. So, when you do a 10-minute speech, that is harder than doing an hour-long speech because you have to get your key points in just 10 minutes, right?
Hmm.
But I want to say everything that's in here, every single thing. And I obviously can't.
Yeah.
So I have to remind myself to be self-aware. And this is not supposed to be the kitchen sink. This is supposed to be an introduction for people. Obviously, it's only 10 minutes. What are the key things I want to get across? How do I rationalize that and make it smaller? All of those things are that planning and organizing executive function that I think as I look back or consider what might be going on, I think that's a part of it too.
Yeah. It just makes me think of whenever I pack for a holiday or no, let's say just going away for a weekend. It's, you only need to take a few things, but I can't be bothered to sit down and figure out what those few things are that I need. So it's much easier if I just take everything, because then I'll have it. But it's
Don't we
just,
just leave our suitcases packed? Don't you just leave it in the room, and live out
oh,
of it the whole time? And that's like what you take. Just
yeah.
like put your toothbrush in as well and away we go kind of thing.
Well, that's I'll take far more than I need, and then just literally probably spend most of the time in the clothes that I arrived in.
That was in university. I did that. I went to Cuba a bunch of times, took a carry-on, stuffed to the gills, shoes, outfits, all of it. And then I just spent the whole week in my bathing suit and didn't put anything on.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, Cuba sounds nice. I'm just starting a documentary series about the history of South America. But yeah, so I do quite fancy a trip there. So tell me, you've explained a bit about your career as a lawyer, and you've mentioned obviously that a year and a half ago you had this ADHD diagnosis. And so, what's the journey been like since then? And what's led you into this position of wanting to speak and talk about ADHD?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I was already kind of reviewing what my strengths and desires were at work. And I think, well, first of all, I'll say, I think over this last year and a half, I've grown more than I have in my entire life, other than when I was born from the womb and started walking, let's say, in those first couple of years of life, right? Um, I've been a very black and white person. I believed that there's only one answer to everything. That's part lawyer training, part Caribbean mother, strict parents kind of thing. But I found that over time, being impacted myself and observing how I'm impacted, it's made me much more compassionate and much more willing to entertain that just because people aren't behaving the way that I think they should, that there's something wrong or they're not doing the right thing. And it's very funny because when I worked, I used to think a lot about this diversity of thought idea because we focus quite a bit on diversity, cultural diversity, and all that other stuff. But when I behaved a bit differently, a bit more too much, a little bit more bold and confident, people were bothered by that. And I didn't really have enough information to really make the connection that I was doing the same thing, the opposite
Mm.
direction, right? So I feel every day I learn something about myself. I've learned about compassion towards myself as well, and I am all about this now for myself and others. So yeah, I think in general I've really shifted into this much more compassionate human being and open human being that I maybe wasn't before. And I like to tell people that because especially in law, there's a lot of lawyers with ADHD and because everything's on fire all the time, right? It's
Mm.
complex, it's new, it's urgent all the time. But I think it's important to know that we are all on this journey to figure out who we are, whether it's ADHD or any other factor in our lives. But I was thinking about what would I like to do instead when I left law? And much to the horror of my mother, I did not take another law job while I tried to figure that out. I just walked away from it all, lucky enough to be able to. And just maybe 4 to 6 months before my diagnosis, I had started to think, well, I used to think I would like to maybe be a coach after lawyering, but I was resisting it because it seemed like every lawyer who retired from lawyering became a coach for lawyers.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that. In hindsight, I realized actually what was less attractive to me, I think, is the idea that it was anything long term, right? I don't want to meet the same person every day, every week for 6 months to have a conversation about their struggles, which is why, now I offer these peer support sessions and they're one-on-one. There may be one time, 3 times max that I would meet with someone, and it's very impromptu kind of thing. Then I started to think, well, if I can train people, I can swing in on a day, give a brand new presentation every time. It's an hour, 2 hours, half a day, whatever it is. And then I leave and the next group is there for me wanting something different. And so that's where the training and the speaking kind of came in. Plus I get to be at the front of the room, the center of attention, like all the things that I like to be, a strobe, my unique living energy on stage, circus clown, etc.
Hmm.
So I was kind of heading in that direction generally. And I thought at first the topic might be authenticity. And it was early on, so I wasn't very set with, what does that actually look like? I did have a bit of a framework, felt a little bit fluffy, especially for the corporate audiences and law firms that I was looking to target. But as I was working through that, I realized that all of the things I wanted to be more authentic about were tied directly to the traits that I have as an ADHD person, right? So everything that was ever just that I got accolades for at work were as a result of my ADHD. You want me to get something done on a tight deadline? I'm going to do that. You want me to figure out a really complex thing? I'm going to do that. Want me to see how the law applies to the business and the regulators and, you know, the bottom line and the tax department, all of that? I can do that. But also, I will be confident, sort of bordering on the word that someone used for me, aggressive, sort of, not patient, not timely, sometimes not neat and tidy in my office. You know, if I'm not timely, that impacts other people in the office. They were bothered that, they need more time to think about things. Well, I can't get started though. And so I'm just going to adjust the timeline. And can you do it faster? Because that's easy for me.
Hmm.
So when I realized that those stories were all the things I wanted to share about authenticity and combine that with the journey of realizing what the symptoms of ADHD are, how they're showing up for me day to day, how they change over time, I decided after a little bit of resistance, I didn't want to jump on the bandwagon and monetize a condition, right, that I had. But people are interested. I tell you, whether or not corporations and law firms are ready to hear the message, I have not left a room yet without individuals in the room coming up and saying, "Oh my God, thank you." I felt like looking in a mirror. I didn't know that this might be what it was. I didn't know, and look at you, you're successful. I can still be successful too, especially talk to schools or universities. Um, yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question. I think I've just,
Right. No, so I'm interested to know when you go and speak in companies, I'm trying to envisage what's happening. Are they inviting you in? Is the company inviting you in so that they can, suppose, show that their workforce, that they are being inclusive to people with ADHD or neurodivergence, or are they getting you in so that individuals can say, "Oh, that's what I've got." And so you talk about individuals saying, "Oh, I didn't realize, and maybe I have ADHD," or was there another motive that the company got you into to sort of start a conversation? So how does that work?
yeah, I think there's a mix of conversations that I'm having. And this is very new, I'm realizing, here in Canada, particularly. A little bit more advanced in the US, maybe, but not too much from what I'm discovering. I've had folks tell me, I want this conversation to be something where everyone says, aha, and maybe they seek some help if they need it, a diagnosis or some understanding or coaching. I've also had folks kind of wanting to fix the ADHDers. Like we have some performance appraisals that this person just doesn't know how to speak to the partners and play the politics and those kinds of things. And I'm not into fixing anything. In those cases, I try to turn it around and I want now the organization to understand this because I think those two, every audience has both, right? We have people with ADHD, we have people with kids with ADHD, we have people with spouses with ADHD. And then we have people who just think it's something for lazy young boys in grade school and that you grow out of it and that anybody who says they have it is on a bandwagon and they don't get it. So there's these extremes, right? And then there's people in the middle who have kind of heard of it, but I don't really understand what it is. I don't think there's enough information out there for anybody to have, even for me trying to find like, what does this mean for me? It's difficult to find it all and bring it together. So with that in mind, I like to make sure that everybody knows what ADHD is, whether it's the individuals who don't have it and really don't understand it at all, or to give a bit of context to even folks that may have been diagnosed and who, like my psychiatrist didn't tell me a whole lot about what it was. He just kept saying I was distracted. No, I'm not. I'm depressed and anxious and I just don't feel motivated. And, is that distraction? Well, I tried medication and discovered exactly how normal people
Mm.
don't get distracted all the time. Look at me turning away to take a message and then coming right back to where I was working on that thing immediately without
Yeah.
45 minutes of ping pong around my apartment first, right? So, I think everybody benefits from understanding, even just at a very basic level. It doesn't have to be the science of it, but this is what the storytelling of this is what it looks like at work. This is how, where you thought it was a personality thing, it's actually a way I process. Where you thought I was all about me when you told me that your dad died, and I said, I have a dad and, he's sick before and, you know, and you're bothered by that. But when you have an understanding, that is me trying to empathize with you by giving you a commonality that you can say, oh, Sarah has a dad too, and she totally can understand what it's like to have a sick dad. Maybe she gets me.
Yeah.
That kind of storytelling, I think, really helps people to say, oh, maybe I should question what I assume about this person. I don't think I've ever met someone who's intentionally lazy. I don't think I've ever met anybody who's intentionally rude and mean. People just operate differently, right?
Yeah.
And if we make that assumption instead of getting curious, you can't build relationships, right? You
Mm.
can't get the best out of people. You can't I'm not going to thrive in a place that's constantly telling me to pipe down and be less myself because myself is what I bring to the job. That's what makes me amazing at it. It's what
Yeah.
gets the business to listen to me because they like happy go lucky circus clown Sarah in the office who can take a joke and can, you know, see their side of the picture too and not just the regulatory one and be the Department of No. I'm like, okay, you want to achieve this. Explain that to me so we can build that and also have it match with the regulation, right? So my ADHD weaknesses that were identified are also the things that make me good at my job.
Mm.
Another example is timing. And I didn't realize, I used to think I'm at work here from whatever time, call it 9 o'clock sometimes. And I'm still here at 10 o'clock at night or midnight. Like, why is everybody else so lazy? Why do they want to go home? Why don't they care about their jobs? Why am I the only one that does work? When I look back now, I can see many things. Circadian rhythms for me are different. I am an absolute night owl insomniac. The silence of an office when everybody goes home allows me to actually get my work done.
Yeah.
I am not a morning person, right? Like I picked this time slot of 11 a.m. my time to record because if I picked 9 or 8 or 7, I would be a zombie.
Mhm.
And I would go to work at 9 even, and I wouldn't get anything done until noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So when I look back now, I think, oh, I just didn't ever get to sleep because the society expectation was arrive at 9 o'clock otherwise you're not doing your job. But what if me being there at 10 o'clock at night helped the folks that live in Hong Kong that we did business with?
Yeah.
They were able to get in touch with me. So, if we can't look at it and say, what's going on for this person? How can we benefit from it even as an organization? Which I realized your question was about organizations, and I'm like all over about nothing to do with that. But, we've got to look at how we can benefit from those unique strengths and how can we leverage them rather than saying, oh, that person doesn't fit in with us here. How can we make them more like us?
Yeah.
Which was my
Yeah.
performance appraisals.
I think, I mean, a few things that you said in that you touched a little bit on sort of I suppose what I'm taking from it is the misconceptions of ADHD. You use the example of, like, if somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, my dad's died," and you go, "Oh, I've got a dad." I would find that would be something that I would find myself doing. You're at a party or you're in a social situation and somebody's talking, and I would be. It is understanding where you're coming from, but then understanding how that might be perceived. I would be wanting to say, if I can't keep this person engaged and talking, then I failed at, at being liked or whatever, or, showing an interest in them. So I would find, oh, well, I've done that as well. And what, when you take a step back, it was like, well, probably you should have allowed them to talk about that thing that they did and, should bathe in that glory a little bit rather than you go, oh, whatever you've just done, I've done it too.
Yeah.
And what I would find is if ever that was sort of feedback given to me, like, oh, it sounds like you're always a bit boastful, or I would feel that's how I came across. I get the overwhelming sense that I don't feel understood. People don't understand me. And a lot of the time, I probably didn't understand myself because, when you start reviewing yourself like that's, you tend to do that all internally in your head. And because you can't
Hmm.
regulate all of those thoughts, you just loop and loop and don't really come to any solutions. And I think in terms of having that understanding about your own ADHD, but then also being able to communicate what ADHD is to a company where there'll be people who are neurotypical, and maybe their understanding is just like a very basic understanding of a list of symptoms. It's like, oh, procrastinate, or, a bit disorganized sometimes. I feel that a neurotypical person might just, run down that list and say, well, I do all those things from time to time.
Yeah.
It's just a made up thing. And I find it really helpful to start with by just explaining the scientific bit of why an ADHD brain is distracted or is not working in that executive functioning department as a neurotypical brain would. And then it helps to explain why all these things are more frequent. And if you've lived with that all your life, you've got a whole load of labels or thoughts about yourself, negative thoughts that
Yeah.
reinforce these traits. And I think, if companies can then sort of understand that, it then becomes, working forward on how we can change certain things so those little triggers either don't happen or, I'm sure you've probably got
Yeah.
examples of things that you can change in a company.
Right.
Uh,
Yes. I agree with you. I always start probably the first 20 minutes of any 101 talk is exactly what you're describing. Just a little less on this. It's science, but it's not science. It's like which prefrontal cortex. That's not the level of detail I'm going into because I think people are a bit early on the journey. But you look at any newspaper, you look at WebMD and look up what the definition of ADHD as a condition is, and everybody would think, "Oh, I do that too. I'm distracted sometimes. I can have trouble paying attention. I can be hyperactive and a little excitable." And so then I explain, well, has it impaired you in these
mhm.
various ways? And then I tell stories about how it's impaired me. And then people say, what are you talking about? It took you 8 hours to turn your dishwasher on because you kept thinking maybe you'll put this coffee cup in it. And every time you looked at it and then you turned your back on it and then it was dinner time and the dishwasher wasn't on and you had to order takeout because you didn't do it. And then why didn't you just do the dishes? Right. So while there's a reason for that, that is not a task. That is a monumental task that you think should be a just do it thing, and it is not. So I go through that piece, and then we sort of tie it to, okay, well, what are some of the ways that we can adjust for this? And the biggest thing, honestly, be curious about someone, ask them questions, listen to what they have to say about it, and believe what they tell you. Don't, if someone says, I'm not being lazy, I just blah, 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 don't say, well, yeah, but you're just being lazy, right? The only people, including myself, that I've ever observed being lazy are people who have a problem at their job already that they're checked out of. It's not about laziness. It's about a broken organizational situation that they're not happy. It's not when I say I can't go to the gym unless someone's waiting there for me. Don't say, oh, yeah, me too. But, I just make sure I get up every day at 6 o'clock and I go anyway. Okay, well,
Mhm,
if I did that, I would do it once and then I would never be back to the gym for a year and a half because
mhm,
it was such a monumental thing for me to do. Yeah. So I always do start with that. And I think just that understanding, because so much is so simple, right? The very first step is be curious, but not just about your colleagues and the people that seem to be neurodivergent. Be curious about yourself even for the neurodivergent folks, right? One day, soon, I think, I'm going to write a talk called Everything You Wish You Knew About Neurotypical People, but Were Afraid to Ask, because I'm realizing to your point about when you now look at yourself, you see, oh, maybe someone would perceive me that way. Now I understand why they perceive me that way because I thought I was the same as them. I didn't know that I was showing empathy by sharing my story. I thought, why are you so offended? The negative label that I'm all about myself or I don't care about people. I was so confused because I think I'm extremely empathetic. I think I care very much about people. I cry about strangers, like any commercial that is sad, human beings that I meet in the street that tell me a sad story. So that was very confusing to me because I thought, I feel like I'm empathetic, but why does everyone think I'm all about me? Well, now I know why, because that's not how people receive what I'm saying to them.
Mhm.
So now I can choose to adjust it if I want, because I see the person's face drop. And instead of thinking, what's that person's problem? I'm just being empathetic. I say, they're expecting that listening moment. Just a moment. Let me just say, tell me more.
Mhm.
And said, right? And it's not my strength, but I now know that's and that's what I want folks to understand about ADHD as well. Oh, wait, what if instead of being, oh, Sarah's all about herself, I said, I really just need someone to listen to me right now. Would you mind just hearing my story for a second and we can come to you later, tomorrow, whatever? I'm not going to take offense to that.
Mhm.
Thank you for telling me what you need. And yes, absolutely, I can listen now. I didn't realize that's what you were looking for. The only person it doesn't work with is my husband because I need to, I can't. I'm practicing, but I need to figure out how to not try to solve. But I think that's a very relationship
Yeah, I mean,
challenge.
I'm learning that as well. I'm learning this thing of sometimes people just need to tell you something and just be heard. But when I'm hearing something, I'm just like, well, you could start with this, and then you could do that, and then you could do that, and I'm going to tell them that in a minute, and then you're like, oh no, this is a listening moment. I'm going to try that. Head
But it's
tilt.
something to practice, right?
Yeah.
Because the other challenge is in our heads, we have every idea on earth, right? And it can be, we might not even be paying attention. We're listening as in we're not speaking, but maybe we're not listening because we're in our heads solving, puzzling, doing all of that. So I think, yeah, it takes some practice to say, no, let me actually just be present here and listen to this person.
Well,
And
that
they
I
want it too.
yeah. I mean, I have that a lot. So I will literally be listening to someone, and like you said, it's like, okay, this may look like I'm listening because I'm not talking, but I'm receiving the information that they're giving me. But then I'm also having two conversations with myself, saying we could say this, and then the other one's going, no, that's going to come across wrong. And then after a little while, you're like, oh, maybe I haven't been listening. It's very
Yeah.
challenging. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I wonder, once you've been into a company and you've maybe started this introduction to ADHD and explained what it is, does it go beyond that in terms of helping them come up with accommodations, or do you give them the tools for them to do that themselves? How do you think they take their first steps into?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think where I am right now, and I mentioned to you before we got into this, I'm kind of new on the journey in this path. So I'm also figuring out how to approach it, what I want to do, what work I want to take on. I've had folks ask me to do policy, give us some advice on policy, and I don't mind participating in that, sort of consulting and saying, all right, like what have you done so far? Where do you see the gaps? How can you make some changes? But I'm not interested in coming in and writing policies, which
Mm.
hazard of being a lawyer, people kind of think that might be what I want to do, which I do not. But even in the talks right now, I'm still at such early phase where it's just, do you even know what ADHD is?
Mhm.
What can it look like? Can we start to shift our thinking a little bit? And I've had folks say, well, let's do a few sessions in a row, right? Let's break this down and make it not all of it, the 101 at once. Let's talk about this, then let's, build on it and start talking about, well, what can we do as an individual with ADHD? Let's talk about what we can do as an organization. I think there is hesitancy, as there is with all diversity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility initiatives, because people don't know what it is that they're facing. And they're a bit nervous that if they start talking about this, they are going to have to start doing something about it, which I'm sure it's the case in the UK as it is here that you already have an obligation to accommodate people that need support. But yeah, I think there in a way the desire to get it right is hampering the ability to take a first step, right? Like you don't really know what you're solving until you have this initial conversation, but you want a robust strategy before you start the conversation because that's what we've been trained we're supposed to do, right? We're
Yeah.
supposed to know where we're going and have it all mapped out so we don't make a mistake, especially in the corporate sphere.
Mm.
So, yeah, it's an interesting journey for me to figure out how to persuade folks to take those steps in a way that will be impactful. And it's my personal opinion that understanding it in your core a little bit more is where you're going to need to start that process. And it's where you build the empathy to know what a good accommodation and policy looks like. I often giggle to myself in a bit of a horrified way when people say, oh, well, we have to have a policy on, applying for accommodations. And I think to myself, oh my gosh, if I had to apply for an accommodation, I would never do it. I would just struggle and fail because I mean, how long did it take me it took me, I have a pension at one of the banks that I used to work in 2000. So
Yeah.
24 years later, I'm writing to them and saying, I'm thinking maybe I should move this into an account over here somewhere. Like that is what process does to me, right? Unless someone's holding my hand. If anything's complex or overwhelming or boring or paperwork or doesn't feel important in any way, can wait till tomorrow, it will.
Yeah.
And 24 years later,
Well,
there we go.
that's the catch-22 situation of sometimes getting diagnosed with ADHD is that you have to fill out so many forms and contact so many people that it's like, if you can do that, perhaps you haven't got ADHD because you were too organized. When you were talking then about companies, and I do understand that it is sort of like a very overlapping and nuanced conversation to start because as we were talking before we started recording that, you know, companies want to appear like they're being inclusive, but then there is the fear that as soon as they do open Pandora's box, then they've got to probably get it right. And they're scared of how much that might cost or if they're going to be liable for not meeting those standards. So they're hesitant. But I've spoken to people in the education sector recently and anecdotally to people with kids that are struggling here in the UK with policies that schools have put in place. And I think what you're describing is companies want to have something in place before they want to know what it is that they're going to do before they put it in place. And applying that to how this particular school that I'm referring to, you know, this child, their response to him was, "Oh, we've got a policy in place for that." But every accommodation, I'm saying in quotes, that they had really punished him for ADHD-like things, like he had to carry around a
Yeah.
little thing, get it signed if he wanted to take a time out. And obviously, if you're overwhelmed and need to take a time out, you're going to then get it signed. If the teacher's busy doing something, it's not going to happen. And so
Hmm.
they thought they had solved the problem because they'd got this blanket ADHD policy. And really, the point I'm trying to make is it is a conversation between an individual, because one person with ADHD is one person with ADHD. And
Yeah.
it needs to be a conversation about what challenges that person faces and what is a reasonable accommodation for them, rather than perhaps just saying, this is our policy. Because then you're just jumping out of one box into another box.
Okay. Yeah. And like, there's three things I kind of want to say about this. First of all, what you've described in terms of the accommodation to me show a very deep misunderstanding of what ADHD is, right?
Mhm.
And a desire to fix for your benefit rather than fix for the
Mm.
child's benefit. You do not wish to have a disruptive child who's melting down in class. So here is the policy we're going to put in place. If you're going to melt down, here's the punishment you're going to get. Here's the reward you're going to get for not melting down. Here are the things that we think with neurotypical brains will be helpful for you. And that I think is what I'm hoping to avoid with the work I'm doing is say, well, wait a
Mm.
second. You can't stop trying to fix it for you. Try to figure out what you're prepared to do to help this person thrive at work or in school or in your marriage or relationship, right? What And when I talk to parents, for example, I have lots of former colleagues who call me up and say, oh, I have a child and they're just transitioning from school to university and, you're so successful and you have ADHD and they are exhibiting all these symptoms too. Can you mentor them and help them? And my response to that, which is sort of another thing I'm trialing, is hang on. Yes, I can mentor this person a little bit with their couple of sessions that I described before, the peer support. But then how about we also talk as a family? How about we do some family education so that you can understand? And I say to them, I bet you when your child is late for school or hasn't cleaned their room, you say, okay, well, if you don't clean your room, I'm going to take away your video game, right? Like you can't play or you can't go out with your friends, right? Is that what you do? Yeah, of course. Okay, well, that's not motivating. I'm not going to clean my room any faster because I don't get to go out with my friends, probably. I mean, I might once. It's not going to be a long-term solution. But if you made it interesting, what if you even just sat with me in the room? You don't have to clean my room for me, but what if you sat there and said, oh, don't forget that sock over there, or asked me about my day, or in some way were engaged with me that just gave me that little boost I needed to not feel like this is as big a chore because I've got someone in my room with company. What if you said to your young child, I'm going to put this Beyonce song on and you have to just go up and clean as much as you can do just in this song and then race back downstairs and press this button, right? Okay, now it's a game. Like I want to do it. You challenge accepted, people. Here I go. Except that maybe I'm going to stick around and keep going after that 3 minutes is up because now I've got started and I've got momentum, right?
Yeah.
So I think that education for families and for colleagues is really important. So that's just the misunderstanding piece. Your point about individuality, I think, is very well taken. And it's the challenge in large organizations because how do you do that, right? If you have 10,000 employees, how do you actually make a very specific accommodation for everybody? How do you help other people feel like it's still fair that so-and-so gets to work from home 3 days a week and I have to come to the office every day? And I think that can be a huge hurdle. But, one of my talk topics, for example, is performance appraisals, feedback, that kind of thing. How do you actually make it actionable? Because it's a perfect opportunity to understand if we actually prioritize the feedback process in organizations, the reviews, to build a relationship and understand what the person needs. But also, like I said before, it's a two-way street. So for the employee also to understand what you need. If you're a neurotypical boss, maybe you need certain details that I'm not giving to you, but I don't understand why you need them, right? But that conversation can allow me to do it differently. And then finally, to your point about doing something to be seen to be doing something, we can judge that, right? Like in diversity and inclusion, we talk a lot about how there's a lot of optics being created and not a lot of substance to the changes. But I think it's important to meet people where they're at, including organizations who are trying to do this work. And even if their best intent, there is not really about good intentions, it's about optics. Well, listen, your first step in making me feel seen and heard is talking about me and my challenges at work as though you care about it. So even if you maybe don't even have, like, I'm still going to benefit from that first step of feeling like, oh, now because you're not going to invite in a speaker or a trainer who doesn't care about the topic. So the people in the room are still going to hear from me. They're still going to feel validated. They're still going to feel seen. And then that's your opportunity to look and say, what was the impact of this? Oh, look at the feedback all these employees gave. Like that was really impactful. People want to hear more of this. Now you have a business case maybe to bring in the next speaker on a similar topic. Maybe it's not ADHD. Maybe it's autism or dyslexia or dyspraxia or Tourette syndrome. Like maybe it's any neurodivergence, right? But I think the idea, and I'll use a story that I tell sometimes a little bit here. When I work with clients, it's easy for me as a lawyer to think I'm supposed to be the lawyer. I'm supposed to know everything. I feel like a fraud if I don't know the law in the first second. The absolute most impactful conversations I've had, both in my securities world and as a sole practitioner, have been where I say, I can help you with this. It's new to me. I don't know, like I'm going to have to learn alongside you. I'm not going to bill you for the extra learning time, but if you're comfortable with that, I'm going to need to learn about your business that you're trying to achieve. I'm going to have to, look at the law and figure out how to do this. And that connection builds more trust than me pretending I know everything. And they feel like the peon that doesn't know anything about the law. And but it also sets me up for now I better know the law because I've
Mhm.
blustered about it. Right. And I think if people could appreciate how much goodwill you get from starting and trying, even if you get it wrong, we think that if as an organization we try something new or as a school, even, right? Okay, well, this guy seems to need, I always see this accommodation, give people more time in a test. Oh my gosh, do not give me more time. Give me less time and you'll get a better result. Because I probably will sit there staring at things and twirling my hair and looking out the window if you give me more time, right? That's not an accommodation that works for me, but it's what all neurotypical
Mhm.
people or neurodivergent people are given as an accommodation. Like, why?
Yeah.
But if I feel like you've tried, I'm less likely to accuse you of wrongdoing. I feel cared for. I feel supported. I feel safe enough to say that more time thing doesn't really help me. I actually would really rather this other accommodation that would really help me. And I feel like I'm able to start the conversation. And this is what, how you build a relationship inside of a firm. And it's what can sound very overwhelming when I have 10,000 employees in my organization. How
Yeah.
do I do that? Right.
Well, to speak on that point that you made, the second one about how do you make accommodations if you're a big company, it reminded me of something. I've been trying to find it on your website or on your. It was a little quote of, like a little turn of phrase, and it got me thinking about that topic. And is it something about respect, building companies that are respectful and profitable? I'm not sure if that's what it was, but it what I took from that was sort of what I think I'm taking from that second point is you have to have a little bit of trust. If you are making one accommodation for one person, but not for the other, if you're showing respect to all of your employees to say, and I'm thinking of specific examples of places where I've worked where, particularly over COVID, where people were sort of trying to get to grips with this working from home. And then when COVID had all finished and it was like, do we come back into the office now? People had been like, oh, you're trusting us to work from home now. Surely if I get the work done and I feel happier, that sort of trust and respect that goes a long way in terms of
Yeah.
allowing people to perform better. But then, yeah, but there is always an urge for companies to say, well, I need to be able to see you. It's easy for me to manage you if I can see you. So that gets my job done better. But then if you take that trust and respect back and it's all just have to be, cookie cutter and the same for everybody.
Well, listen, here is my question to people that would say it's easier for me to manage you if I can see you. You're wrong. And I'm not saying that because I am encouraging work from home, even. I'm just saying what helps you manage better is knowing your employee and understanding who they are, what they are good at, where their weaknesses are, and what will help them. If I had an option to work 100% from home all the time and I worked in a big organization, I would probably not take it. I would say, yeah, I want some flexibility. I want to be able on the days when I don't feel really up for getting dressed to be able to work from home. On the days when all I'm going to be doing is being on a call all day, I don't need to be in the office. But I prefer human interaction. I get more done when anybody is around me. This is a body doubling concept where people are probably judging me if I'm just sitting around doing nothing, right?
Mhm.
So for me, that's what would work better. I think it's all the societal baggage that we have, right? That this is what industry looks like. This is what a business looks like. Because the trust that you're describing, like I would also certain days be more effective if I knew I had people coming for the weekend and I had to do laundry and some other prep. Well, I don't work a solid block of 8 hours when I'm at the office, anyways.
Mhm.
And imagine if I could spread that time out over 12 hours instead and take breaks and get these things done in a way that doesn't overwhelm me. Now my life is thriving and my work is still getting done. All of those things are very beneficial. And I feel more rested, less mental health challenges, less illness in general, less use of benefits, less, all of the stuff that is a benefit to letting people live their lives the way that suits them best and do their jobs the way that they thrive and focus on the areas that they're great at. And, being flexible. In law firms, in my in-house role, I always had an assistant. That was excellent because that meant that I had someone to help me with a lot of administrative things that I'm terrible at, to prod me to say, oh, that bill from external counsel that's been on your desk for 6 months, like they probably want to get paid. Can you review that now? Sure. But I needed my assistant for certain things like that, the babysitting piece of my
Mm.
work. There were other people who needed her for other things. Well, why don't you pair us up, and two people that need different things and different amounts of time and different levels of support are paired with people that can give that to them, rather than everybody has to only get access to the assistant 50% of the time and only can use it for these things that assistants are for. I don't need the assistant for what they're for. I need them to babysit me. That's to manage my calendar, to tell me I'm late for a meeting, to, print documents that I'm going to forget I need for a meeting, that kind of stuff.
Mm.
So, yeah, I think there's just a way to look at it differently and to look at it. If we take the pressure off of everybody has to be treated the same, and we look at what does the organization need to thrive and what are we prepared to do to help our employees to thrive, I think we would find that it's not that the CEO with 10,000 people below has to spend all of his time on diversity and inclusion and accommodations. It's that each individual team can manage that amongst themselves, as long as the tech department is not going to be pissed that the sales department does different things than them. Well, why do they get to have Friday afternoons off all summer and we have to work on those days? Converse about what you want, and not everybody will want the same thing, even within those teams.
Mm.
That does not answer your question at all. I'm just, yeah.
No, it does. It does. I mean, I'm just thinking about it in terms of experience of places I've worked, and I thought, oh yeah, I suppose it really does. If it can work in teams, as long as they're not then comparing with each other. But I'm just conscious of time, and there was one question that I haven't asked you that I wanted to know about, because in your bio it discusses your athletics career, and it also mentions Aussie rules, and I can't put the pieces together as to how you've played Aussie rules football and you're Canadian. So how's that?
Yeah. And a world champion, I might add, former. How is that? So my varsity sport in university was field hockey.
Yeah.
And when I finished university and I moved to Toronto from Ottawa, I joined a field hockey club. And because I like fairness quite a lot, and I felt that the people running it were a little bit self-serving, I decided that I was going to start my own field hockey club. And so I said to a random Australian who was there for the first time and the last session of that season, why don't you come try ours club instead that we're starting? It begins in a few weeks. And he said, I will, but only if you try Aussie rules, because they were trying to start. There was a league that was actually the biggest outside of Australia until very recently in Toronto, but it was a men's league.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to get a women's competition off the ground. So I turned up to a training session. It was fun. I was pretty decent at it. And then I played my first game, which was a ridiculous debacle. I save it for another time. But I'd been told beforehand that the person who never stops going for the ball is going to win this game. And I was like, okay, I don't know how to play this game, but I'm just going to keep scraping and clawing for balls and do what I can. And I'm reasonably athletic. So anyway, I had this game. It was wonderful. And when I finished, the coach of my team said, would you like to join the national team in 2 months' time and go to Australia to the World Championships? And I said, yep, because I didn't think at my age that would be a thing. And yeah, so Canada, we've been, aside from Ireland, that's always been the competition. Is it Ireland? Is it Canada? We've lost to them twice, won against them once. That was over the course of 2011 through 2017. Then I was coaching briefly, but then the pandemic happened. And so I exited that. And they've reformatted it now. It's more of a transatlantic. So France and I think the UK came actually to Toronto just in August. It was same timing as the Olympics. So didn't get as much coverage. But yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I just,
Because
yeah.
I'd assumed, and that's the big word, keyword in that sentence. I'd always assumed that Aussie rule, Aussie rules football hadn't really travelled that far outside of Australia, really. And for you to say that, oh, if I understand you correctly, that it's between Canada and Ireland, they seem to be the best too. But well, how come? What about the Australians? Were they
Oh, they
not?
don't play. No, they don't join that competition because they would absolutely clobber us all
Okay,
for sure.
I see.
So it's a carnival style world championships that tries to get exposure for the game.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the reason because Australia doesn't put a team in, but they will allow us. For example, the first year I went, we did a friendly match against a local club and sort of saw what the difference in talent was. But we've been doing this now for years, and so the level is increasing quite
Hmm.
drastically here in Canada for sure. I don't know if I think you might not be aware, but there is a giant set of teams and leagues in London. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
this. Like
Yeah.
they have now, I'm sure they've now surpassed Canada in terms of size by
Yeah.
multi factors, probably because of also the size of London, obviously. But yeah, it is growing in popularity. It's a really fun sport. It's People confuse it with rugby, but the similarity kind of ends at its full tackle and the ball kind of looks like an oval also. But yeah, it's much more like Gaelic football, which is why the Irish, aside from being very athletic, are excellent at it. But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, for what I've seen of it, it does look like a very brutal sport, but very fun. Yeah.
yeah. On recruitment, I usually advise people not to look at the professionals playing because it looks, when you see the highlight reel, it's all the crash and bash and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. But it's actually, I feel, less brutal than a sport like rugby because the ball keeps moving. So
Hmm.
your goal is not to just crush someone into the ground and lie on top of them kind of thing. It's to
Hmm.
stay on your feet, keep moving it, but make them dispose of the ball illegally. But it's extremely, I personally, when I look at the professionals, both women and men in Australia, I think it's the most impressive set of athletes I've seen. It's
Mm.
a sport that includes everybody's type, style, size, every, different way. It's very diverse. It's a
Yeah.
great example of diversity, actually.
Well, there we go. What a way to complete the circle. And
Yeah.
so, where can the listeners find you online? Would you like me to direct them to your website, the Growth
I think
Council?
LinkedIn is probably
Yeah.
the easiest place to find me. I'm a bit more prolific there. My website remains a work in progress. But so yeah, the website is also there for them and my YouTube channel as well. Sarah J. Ennor is where I can be found. And I'm slowly building up what collateral's on there as well if people want to check out the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us today. I've really enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope you have, well, all the best for the future. And it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, there we have it. Thank you so much for listening this far. If you want to hear more episodes, then please subscribe on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you use. It really helps to spread the word. So if you know anyone this episode could help, then please share it with your friends. If you want to follow me on social media, I am on Instagram at ADHD_goals, and you can find me on Facebook too. If you want to get in touch with the show, then you can email me at hello@adhdgoals.co. And finally, if you're struggling to manage your ADHD and you would like me to be your coach, then please head over to my website and get in touch. Until next time, bye for now.